and they've almost become shadows of their former self. They're very shy to speak, they're reluctant to ask questions, they find it difficult to respond to questions that are asked. And I think that is a sort of, in fact, Sir Ken Robinson, one of the foremost proponents of the need for a complete rethinking of the educational paradigm in the UK, is saying that we are anesthetizing our children through the education system. You're actually creating brain-dead people.
So you just spoke about the fact that the UK is what we are experiencing also a legacy of our colonial experience and past.
In some respects it is, because if you look at the whole argument in the Caribbean now about universal secondary education, to this day there are people, and unfortunately even some teachers in the Caribbean, who believe that the move to universal secondary education was a big mistake. And I mean, if you think about it, in every era of our development, there are educational stages that help to bolster the changes in society and economy. You look at the social history of, say, a place like Barbados, and you will see that it is the attainment of universal primary education in the post-Moyne era that helped Barbados make the transition to a modern, from a plantation economy
but you're making a huge distinction compared to what you said earlier. You spoke about universal secondary, and Barbados' example is universal primary.
No, I'm just explaining the stages. I'm saying in every era of our history, there are certain educational infrastructure requirements or certain human resource requirements that will enable you to make a successful shift to that next stage of social and economic development. So in the late 18th century, the shift to universal primary, the attainment of universal primary education is what gave us the capacity to move from a plantation economy to the beginnings of a modern economy. The shift from universal primary to universal secondary education is what gives us the capacity to move to a service economy. And in this period we are in, the information age, the use of ICT, the computer and communications revolution, it is universal tertiary education that will give us the human resource capacity to
I want to challenge us, and here's how I'm going to challenge that.
Yeah.
We just spoke, you said it, that the child who is raised eventually is a shy person who do not want to speak, who can't even hold up their head. We're talking about the service industry, with those are the critical elements of service.
What are the critical elements of
the ability to speak up, the ability to hold up your head, the ability to have a sense of self-worth.
But those have been killed off. But you're not contradicting what we've been saying. We are saying that these are the requirements. Every stage of social and economic development requires a certain human resource capacity within the society as a whole. Some may make it, but if the society as a whole has that capacity, you have the critical mass for the society to make that transition. Now that's a different issue from how well are we doing it, right? And the issue that Susan was talking about earlier speaks to the question of the quality of what we're doing and the content of what we're doing, right? Are we educating our people in the way that is optimal? Are we using the pedagogies that will bring the results that we are looking for? And the simple answer is no.
Let's take our first break. On this edition of Up Next, where our guests are Susan SBranker and Dr. DrJules. We're looking at the issue of early childhood development, its importance in development going forward, and a new focus that will be placed on this. I'm Jerry George. We'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back to this edition of Up Next. We're looking at early childhood development, a new focus, which we'll be telling you about later in this program. But helping us is Dr. DrJules and Ms. Susan SBranker. Dr. Jules, I come back to you. As wearing your hat now as the registrar of CXC, I heard you in a session sometime earlier speak to some data that has been compiled by your institution, CXC. 28% of persons across the region get 0 passes at CXC. And amazingly, less than a quarter, 21.36% get 5 subjects or more. What is that kind of data telling us?
Well, it's telling us that there's a need for a major paradigm shift in education, that we need to establish new benchmarks. It is totally unacceptable, I believe, for the state and parents to invest so heavily in a child's secondary education over a 5-year period. And at the end of that period, for the child to sit a very important examination and come out essentially with no certification. Now, this is not an argument for certifying, not because you warm the benches of a classroom that you must end for 5 years, that you must end up with a certificate. In this 21st century, warming benches doesn't cut it. So you have to meet standards of competence and knowledge and show certain attitudinal traits that would justify your receipt of that certification. So we're very clear in CXC that the quality and the standards of our certification, if anything, must be progressively raised higher rather than lowered. But the challenge...
So you feel that we have lowered it to some degree to get to...
No, we have not lowered it. What I'm saying is, as a testing body, we tell you what the weight of the pig is, so to speak. And in fact, one of the big fallacies that we have in the Caribbean is to believe that if we see patterns of poor performance, people then tend to think about more testing. As President Obama said in a speech in one of the US libraries, you can't get a pig fatter by weighing it more often. Right? So what is really critical is in fact to ensure that we do what has to be done to ensure better performance in the schools. Now, in this period in which we live, there are a lot of elements to the solution that need to be put in place. One, at a policy level, ministries and schools have to do everything possible to ensure that education is not a one-size-fits-all for students. You have students who learn at different rates, who have different styles of learning, and our classroom practice has to cater for that. Secondly, we have to ensure that every student is given a chance at success. Some schools, for example, in the region, will determine which of their students sit CSEC exams at the end of 5 years.
I like what you call it. You call that playing God.
Yes, it is, because in fact, you have not, it means I will look at you and determine you are not going to enter this race. Susan can enter and Jules can enter, but you are not going to enter. And I've not even given you an opportunity to run the race.
And I like the concept, playing God.
Even though for 5 years we've invested in you and we are supposed to have been teaching you and preparing you for this, right? So there are some serious policy decisions that need to be made. I believe too we have to determine what is the cluster of knowledge and certification that our students require as a minimum cluster coming out of secondary school. So you shouldn't be, after 5 years, doing just English and mathematics. In this 21st century, if we're serious about IT being critical for this age, then you should be doing some element of computer studies. If we talk about being part of a global thing and being globally competitive, then a foreign language is absolutely essential. So in CXC, one of the things we've done is adopt the CARICOM, the Statement of the Ideal Caribbean Person, and the UNESCO Pillars of Learning as our fundamental philosophical basis for what we do. And as we go forward, you will see it reflected in the kinds of syllabi that we design. You will see it reflected in the forms of assessment that we give and the content of that assessment. I'm
going to use one of your own quotations again. We are building on sand and the sinkholes are appearing. Where are they appearing?
They are appearing in early childhood, for sure, particularly the 0 to 3 age range. If you look at the birth to 5, on average, it's about 40% coverage across the Caribbean. That means 60% of the 0 to 5 are not being exposed to any stimulation